Welcome back. We're glad that you're liking this podcast enough to come back and listen again. These stories are dear to my heart. This is Karleigh, and I'm reading for you this dark fantasy elfa novella. It's the first book in a trilogy. So on we go with the Tales of Eldelórne. Last week, the humans really got on Roevash's nerves and almost started a brawl. Good thing Captain Ferric was there to tone down the noise. He also gave Roe a quest. Let's see how that goes. Chapter 6, Honor and Heart. Roevash was expertly sliding through shadows unseen as he ran. He was moving at a fast pace, making his way south and east towards the lost gardens of Ilian Henny. Beyond would be the hidden ranger post he was told about, located somewhere in the foothills. For many long days he ran, lost in his thoughts. The memory of his mother's voice haunted him. He could hear her words of love sung so clearly now. The noble hero she spoke of in bedtime stories might have been my own father. Roe beat himself up for not realizing that. The garden is where it must have happened. How unseeing I was. A human might not have dishonored my mother as I imagined in my silly elfling mind. Roe had never met one of these rangers, even though they lived so close where he grew up. If what the captain told him was true, these men could not have committed such depravity upon innocence as he had believed. This would change the truth he'd held since his elfling days into falsehoods. It was hard for Roevash to comprehend making an error in judgment of this magnitude. He had learned from Captain Ferric the Dargilian were known for their friendship and care of Edlin. They were given a special grace by Ilmatar itself for their heroic acts. Roe thought about his foolish vow and how he needed only to ask his mother. She would have told him anything. All the silence between us to protect her. What has it wrought? How unthinking I was, he cringed. What could you hope to find after all this passage of time? He shook his head, sarcastically goading himself. In his distraction, Roevash did not see the band of men hidden beneath the forest canopy, sleeping in the dark shadow. He almost stepped on one. Leaping high, he grabbed a low tree limb and thought to swing clear of the group when the branch cracked and gave way, slamming him flat on his back where the coals of the fire smoldered. He leaped and rolled to the left in a fury of smoke, dust, and sparks, only to crash hard against an unmoving tree trunk. It knocked the wind out of him, barring his escape. Ugh, lords, he groaned in the pain of a torn ribcage through gritted teeth. The sleeping men moved quickly to subdue whatever monster or bandit might be attacking. The one who had been on watch was so shocked at Roe's sudden appearance, he didn't even have time to sound an alarm. Half-awake men scrambled up, slinging swords in the darkness, in trained formation, ready to defend themselves. Roevash's hooded cloak had twisted around his arms, holding him captive. He struggled to loosen himself from his tangled coat, still not knowing who or what he was facing. "Light a fire," a voice commanded. Roe saw the glint of a sword pointed at his throat and froze. "Brother?" the man said as the glow of the fire struck Roe's startled face. "No, impossible. He's dead at the pike of the gods' forsaken enemy." The mumbling leader trailed off with a puzzled look. "Who are you that I'm seeing here? Speak quickly or I shall run you through and be over with it. I'm tired and I need my rest." He deeply sighed as he waited for an answer. "Well, let me not trouble you, kind sir," Rose said as cordially as he could muster. "I am but a simple soldier sent home to aid my ailing mother on her deathbed." Roevash lied in the face of what could be a threat. He could see that the leader wore military garb of some sort that he did not recognize. "See, here, I have a document for your inspection," he said as he carefully picked the release papers out of his coat pocket with 2 fingers and painfully handed them over. While the other man took them from his hand, he rubbed his stinging cracked ribs, inspecting the damage. "Roevash, honorable release from service, I see. Sealed only this week. Then you may well be, as you say." The man flipped the paper around, checking its authenticity, and then lowering his sword into his scabbard, handed it back. He put his hand out to help Roevash stand up. Roe cringed to a standing position with a torn rib. He was shocked that he and the man were the same height. They lingered for a moment, eye to eye, just staring at each other. "Cannot be too careful, you know," the man's voice trailed off as he studied the young soldier's face before him. "I am from the Southlands near Ilian-Henny," Roe spoke hesitantly, taking in the details of the man's face. "Just west of the river. I only seek passage. When I tripped by accident over one of your men here," he pointed awkwardly. Roevash smiled broadly to diffuse any doubts about his intent, while looking around at the many frowning faces. The men, seeing he wasn't a threat, settled back down into their warm places. "That is where we're headed. You could stay in our company and find safety in numbers. My name is Karleigh of House Isoken." He reached out and firmly shook Roevash's hand in a standard greeting this time. Roe tried to smile but cringed in the force of it on his injury. Karleigh didn't seem to notice as he turned to toss another log onto the growing flames of the campfire. "I am commander of these fine men." Karleigh couldn't stop himself from staring. He could see it made the young soldier uncomfortable to be so scrutinized, so he got right to the point. "It's just that you look so like someone." He trailed off, trying not to be rude, but then, "Your mother, would she be one of the fair folk by chance?" he blurted out. "What of it?" Roe's eyes narrowed as he prepared in his mind for a possible fight. "My brother Marin," Karleigh sighed. "He recently perished in a lost cause for no reason other than the vanity of a castle steward," he hissed as he wagged his head angrily. "Sorry, I need not raise my voice, Callan sighed quietly, but you see I am grieving his loss. Shaking his head again, he took a short breath and tried to compose himself. Callan motioned for them to move up closer to the warmth of the blazing flames. I'm sorry to hear that, Roe politely said as they sat down by the fire on old tree stumps that had just been set there for that purpose. Someone pushed a bowl of broth into Roe's hands and some cuts of cold meat. His gut complained about the pain of emptiness at the sight and smell of food. Roe hadn't realized how starved he was from running for the past few days. He momentarily forgot about the conversation, and smiling tiredly, he nodded and thanked the kindness of the unknown man as he ate hungrily. It's just that you look so much like him, Callan brought the conversation back. Long ago, my brother hand-wed a young elven maiden named Thendiel. At the sound of his mother's name, Roevash choked and sputtered soup back into the bowl. My mother, was all he could say, holding the food close to his face as if to hide behind it. He hadn't heard his mother's name spoken in well over 300 years. Roe's crystal blue eye haunted Callan, and again he tried not to stare. He held a piece of bread out, hoping it would distract this young man with the startled face from rashly reacting before he could finish having this conversation. Roevash sat in silence, looking at Callan through the flames of the campfire, stunned with the sudden growing realization of who he may be talking to. He looked down at the bread in Callan's hand and slowly took what was offered. Still being cautious, Roe decided to listen as he continued to chew the food slowly. Your mother, Callan said gently, not expecting any reply, as he repeated Roe's words. After staring over the fire at each other a little while longer, Callan said solemnly, They did what they had to during stressful times. They made vows to one another with great love and haste because our king's conflicts to the north called him to duty. You can understand this, being a soldier yourself. He tried to measure in his mind how Roevash was taking this all in. I hope you know this, Callan spoke softly, shaking his head. He grieved now for a family his brother never knew. He remembered how Marin had desperately sought to return home, but because of his duty was never afforded the time. He looked down into the crackling flames of the fire as he continued. Though Darjeeling are blessed with long lives, time still seems to cheat us of our loved ones when at war. With a nod of his head, he solemnly pointed out the orange-burning night sky to the southeast, acknowledging yet another war on the horizon. So goes this joyous and sad tale of your mother and my brother. God's rest his soul. Callan frowned as he looked down in the fire for solace. Roe thought this man seemed fair enough, but he'd learned the hard way to be wary of men who may be seemingly trustworthy. The tiredness of the last few days' exertion and the occasional sting of his injury started to catch up with him. So he sat and ate food. Roe allowed his body to go into a restful, healing state. Callan continued telling Roevash stories about his life before all this recent fighting and the life of the brother he had just lost. Roevash's face grew soft and weary as his torn ribs healed, and he contemplated all he was hearing. Captain Ferrick's words came blaring back into his mind. The sword was owned by a Darjeeling ranger. I would swear you have the same quality of features, of height and face. It was as if he stood before me when I first glanced at you. I have my own father's sword here, then. Roevash brought the weapon out that was strapped across his pack where it hung wrapped in protective cloth. He thought his mission to Captain Ferrick was done as he handed the work over to his newly found uncle. Yes, Kaelin recognized it. Your mother had this made and gave it to Marin the day he had to leave. This sword is yours now as his only heir. He handed it back to Roevash's hands. Roe gulped at the sound of it. Heir? He had never thought in terms of gain as humans do. Where he was raised, there was never a need or want. But this was a great gift, and Roe did not feel worthy of it. His eyes teared up, and he tried to give the sword back to his uncle, who knew the man as brother and seemed way more deserving. See here, his uncle pulled his own weapon forward so Roe could see. I have my own blade that suits me. Kaelin had to smile as he respectfully refused his brother's sword. He knew Roevash was raised among elves, and they rarely owned anything humans would call valuable or real property. Oh yeah, there was the occasional named weapon that had become legendary. The Edelin revered these things, but they were only borrowed in times of great need from their king's armory. Inheritance was a whole new concept to an elf. Roe would just have to keep it. Roevash reverently pressed the gold-etched filigree against his cheek and felt the cold steel. Kaelin could tell he enjoyed ownership of this sword. This is my father's, made for him by my mother's heart. Roe could barely comprehend that a weapon such as this now belonged to him. As he unsheathed it, the metal sang out in his hands as all finely crafted elven swords do. Thank you. Roe still could not believe it, so he just smiled softly and shook his head, not knowing what else to say. Kaelin grew solemn, breaking the trance. Roe sheathed the sword and tied it back onto his pack for further inspection later. What is it you wish to know? Roe asked politely, seeing the man wanted to say something. I cannot command you, Roevash, but I feel that under the circumstances you must come with us. There is something important you need to see. That is, if the delay in accompanying me does not stress your mother's health, he added curiously. Roevash could tell Kaelin had figured out he might have said a half-truth or exaggerated a bit about the sick mother part of his story. His voice low and even, he explained shyly, Mother sailed with Lord Otto to Ilmatar over 340 years ago. She was fated and drawn on to death and compelled to go. Roe nervously picked up a stick he had found nearby and poked it into the dying fire. A shadow of sadness fell across Kaelin's face in learning that the beautiful and merry Thendiel, as he had known her, was indeed gone from this realm. He just sat and listened as Roevash continued. When he needed me most, through my own impetuous anger, I drove my brother away. My actions dishonored my mother's last wishes. I have searched in vain throughout all these years to beg his forgiveness, but cannot find him. Roe grieved because he kept the memories of his lost family close to his heart. I believe now that he is somehow magically taken away into the waves of Ilmatar. My brother's grief was so deep. I know there can be no other explanation for what I witnessed. Roe struggled with something else on his mind as he made a painful decision. He kept his eyes fearfully riveted to Kaelin as he slowly untied his scarf. And my ears, they betray me into hardship among men. Terror rose in his gut as he revealed his secret to this man and expected the worst for it. He didn't want to fight with him. Kaelin's eyes teared in earnest as all shred of doubt he might have had about Roe fell away. Then it is true. This is not a dream where I will find disappointment upon waking. Oh, my boy, he cried as he stood up and clasped Roe to his chest, welcoming him into the family and releasing all fears. Roevash didn't know what to say. He was surprised again. In 300 years of toiling among humans, this was not the reaction he was accustomed to finding. Roevash has suffered his whole life, fearing who his father may be. And now it's too late. The man has died. What's left to him is his uncle Kaelin, who will teach him a few things about his human side that he probably should have learned a long time ago. If you've been thinking about podcasting, go to your nearest app store, download the free Anchor app, or go to Anchor FM. They have all the tools you need to record or edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. The Anchor team also helps you distribute your podcast with one click. If you're listening to me right now, that's proof that it works. Mind blown. There's no rules or minimums. It's everything you need to podcast in one place. Anchor FM. It's only a click away. Elvish lesson of the day. You may remember in an earlier lesson, Nin means me. Ninhan means literally my brother, but it's meant to carry the weight of a more intimate, loving, and caring understanding between male siblings. Ninhan. Ninhan. These words are going to be very important between the brothers in the episodes to come.